Hi, I'm Dylan with SeaTee Aquatics. At SeaTee Aquatics, our goal is to maintain a pure, organic, and self-sustaining ecosystem in the home aquarium. I got into the reefing hobby because I thought it was pretty cool and it was something to learn. There's a lot of science behind it, and there's also just a lot of really cool creatures, fish, and coral to look at, and it's very relaxing to just have in your home, and it creates a really nice centerpiece for a living room or something like that too. So that's what got me into the hobby. Most people, when they get a fish tank, they're doing freshwater. So they can use water right from their tap, fill their tank up, and then they'll add freshwater fish. But what we're doing is a reef tank, which is a saltwater tank. So there's a lot more that goes into a tank like this. You can't just take regular water from your tap and add it to the fish tank. You need to get purified water, mix the water into salt water with the correct concentration of salt to water, along with other nutrients that the coral and fish need to survive. Most freshwater tanks, you're limited to what most people would put in is like plastic plants, or some people will do live plants. In a reef tank, we put living coral in, so the entire tank is alive. The biggest challenge with maintaining a proper reef tank for coral is keeping everything consistent. You want to make sure that there's a constant level of all of the nutrients that the coral needs. Any swings in these nutrients can stress the coral out and cause it to recede back or start dying. So the basic elements that we would make up a reef tank would be the salt, obviously, and then it would be alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium. And maintaining a proper balance of those three elements is key to keeping coral alive and happy and healthy. You also need enough light for the coral because coral is a photosynthetic organism. It needs light from the sun in order to make its energy in order to continue growing. It also needs enough flow because coral produce waste. So the waste needs to be taken away from the coral because it itself can't move. So the flow of the water will help to remove waste, and it also helps to bring food to the coral too. Some fish are reef safe and some are not. A lot of the fish that we'll put in a reef tank are utilitarian fish that will help to maintain the tank, such as tangs are major algae eaters. They can help to remove hair algae and other forms of algae that will grow in the tank. There's also something such as a diamond sifter goby, which will actually sift through the sand and eat particulates and stuff out of the tank to help keep the tank clean. So one of the biggest problems that people encounter in a reef tank is having too much algae. So most tanks, when you're going through and starting the initial cycle, they'll go through an ugly phase for a couple months, 2 to 4 months usually, where the tank has a lot of algae and there's slimes growing everywhere. It looks brown and green and just, it doesn't look nice overall. And a lot of people get very discouraged by this and they think that they're doing something wrong in their tank. And a lot of people will kind of stop caring for it at that point. Stop taking care of it, let the fish die off, and then the tank never really goes anywhere. And so the biggest thing is getting past that ugly stage, because almost every tank will have an ugly stage at some point. It's not your maintenance that's the issue, it's just that the tank is still going through its initial cycle. But once you get through that first 4 month period or so, and then the next year, after that point, if you can keep it and just keep to a solid maintenance schedule, your tank will always look beautiful after that. Our goal with SeaTee Aquatics eventually is to scale up a coral farm so that we have a large quantity of good quality coral that was raised in a pure, organic, self-sustaining system so that we can provide the highest quality corals to the others in the hobby. This is the bottom of the tank. On this side we have the sump. On this side we have our dosing heads. This is used to dose calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium into the tank, along with any other nutrients that you need to add. And on this side we have our wave maker controllers. Those control the power heads in the tank. On this side we have our apex. This controls all of our pH, temperature probes, and also controls a power strip that you can use to turn devices on and off. So coming from the overflow at the back of the tank, we come down and the tank will overflow into this first chamber where the water will then rise up and come into the filter socks. The filter socks contain the chemical media that I was talking about previously that is part of the issue that we have with this tank. The chemical filtration also clogs up the filter socks, which helps to prevent water from going through them effectively. After going through this chamber, the water then moves into the chamber right here that has the UV sterilizer and chaetomorpha algae. We added the chaetomorpha as an attempt to help eliminate some of the hair algae in the tank. Unfortunately, it hasn't helped with the hair algae at all, although the chaetomorpha is growing quite well. After going through this chamber, the water then moves into the chamber with the protein skimmer and then returns back into the return pump chamber where the water is returned back to the tank. This is the tank. We're having some issues with it right now with some hair algae. We're also having some issues with some vermetid snails. And a couple of years ago, this tank, as we said, it got COVID. We had an outbreak of velvet in the tank, which is very deadly and can cause a lot of issues with the fish. So to start, the biggest issue is the hair algae. The hair algae has become a major issue because the tank had already gone through its initial ugly phase. So when you normally set up a tank, you have to cycle it for a couple of months in order for the beneficial bacteria to grow up and build up in order for the waste from the fish to be broken down properly. After going through this initial ugly phase where we experienced some algae issues, the issues had all subsided, meaning that the tank had been fully cycled. After going through this, a few months later, we started having more issues and the tank seemed to have gone back into an ugly phase. This occurred because there were some nutrient spikes. There's also a bunch of chemical filtration media that's in the filter socks. And unfortunately, this prevents a lot of biological bacteria from building up in the tank because the chemicals are removing the waste before it has a chance to meet the bacteria. So the bacteria loses food source and starts to die off. By replacing the chemical media with ceramic media that is populated with biological bacteria, we should be able to help cut down on the amount of hair algae that's able to grow in the tank. Another issue that we have in this tank is that there are some vermetid snails that can be seen towards the back here. Vermetid snails, some people say that they're good for your tank, other people say that they're not. Generally speaking, vermetid snails are more of a pest in the tank. Vermetid snails are a filter feeder, and at the end of their feeding tube, they will shoot a web out when they're hungry and need to eat, and this web can catch the particulates that are in the tank. Now this sounds like it's a good thing, which in that case it is, but unfortunately the web is also dangerous to coral. If that web is to come out and touch the flesh of any coral, it can cause damage, which could in turn kill the coral. So back in 2020, this tank had an outbreak of the disease velvet. Velvet is a parasitic disease similar to ick. Both diseases appear as white spots on the fish's skin or scales. The difference between the two diseases is that ick tends to be bigger white dots that covers less of the fish, versus velvet tends to be very small dots that are either white or yellow and will cover the entire fish. It is called velvet because it makes the fish appear as if its skin is made of velvet. This can very quickly wipe out a tank. One of the best methods for curing velvet would be to remove the fish from the display tank, put them into a quarantine tank that has copper. The copper will kill the parasites, but you need to remove the fish from the display tank in order to do this because copper will kill coral. And because of the overall setup and how long it's been going, we have determined that the best course of action in order to help fix this tank is to move the fish and coral into a temporary holding tank, take the tank down, and start it from scratch.
If you like our content, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications to join us on our journey through the sea.